I woke up on the cold floor, my body aching, my heart racing. The door was shut. Not just shut, locked. From the outside. And I heard them. Laughing. Whispering. Plotting. I scrambled to my feet and tried to twist the doorknob, but it didn't budge. "Let me out!" I screamed. "Please! What are you doing?" Their voices hushed. Footsteps backed away. Then silence. That was the moment I knew. They weren't just playing a prank. They meant to hurt me. And my father had no idea. He left them in charge. He trusted them. He said, "Take care of your baby sister while I'm gone." But my brothers had other plans. And now, I had no one to help me. Not even myself. Because I was only 10 years old. And they were grown boys. I wasn't prepared for what came next. Cut to black. Hi. My name is Dorothy Coleman, but most people just call me Dotty. I'm 85 years old now. A retired music teacher from Pennsylvania, and a grandma of 3 sweet girls. I've lived through a war, through poverty, through love and loss. But nothing ever shattered me the way that summer did. I don't talk about it often. Not even my kids know the full story. But today, maybe because I feel the end is nearer than I'd like, I want to get it off my chest. Because when I hear people say, "Family always protects you," I just close my eyes and remember that my own brothers were the first people who ever truly ruined me. Let me tell you how it started. It was the summer of 1950. Dad had just gotten a job offer in a neighboring town. He was a postman, proud and hardworking. "Dotty," he said, kneeling down and holding my little hand, "I'll only be gone 4 days. Your brothers will take care of you, all right?" I nodded. I trusted him. And I trusted them. My brothers. Tommy, 17, always quiet, always with his nose in comic books. Rick, 15, the loud one, with a baseball bat always by the door. And the oldest, George, 18, strong, smooth-talking, and scary when he got mad. They weren't saints, but they were family. What could possibly go wrong? The first night, everything seemed fine. They made toast. Tommy showed me a new drawing he made of a dragon. George gave me ice cream. I fell asleep with a smile on my face. But the next morning, something changed. Dad wasn't even out of town yet, and they were already acting weird. Tommy barely looked at me. Rick laughed at me when I spilled milk and called me a stupid doll. And George, well, he just kept staring. Not with love. Not with kindness. With something else. Something I couldn't understand then. But I do now. On the second night, Rick told me I wasn't allowed in the living room. He shut the door behind me and said, "Girls don't get to sit on the couch." I thought it was a joke. But when I peeked in, Tommy shoved me back out. They had taken Dad's beer from the fridge. They were laughing and shouting like wild men. George told me to be quiet, or he'd make me quiet. I remember those words. Make me quiet. That night, I cried myself to sleep. With the lights off. In the laundry room. Because they'd taken over my bedroom and locked the door. Day 3 was the worst. And where I left off at the beginning. That morning, I had woken up in the laundry room, alone and cold. But now I realized, the door wasn't just closed. It was bolted from the outside. I banged and screamed. I cried. I yelled their names over and over. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But then, I heard them. George's voice. "She's freaking out. Rick, told you she'd act like a little baby." Tommy mumbled something. Then George again. "We'll let her out later, after we're done." Done with what? That's when it hit me. This wasn't a game. They were using me being locked up, so they could do whatever they wanted. To my room. to Dad's belongings, to each other. I didn't know if they were drinking, destroying, stealing, but I knew I was the only thing standing between them and consequences. So they locked me away. Like a secret. Like trash. And I was just a 10-year-old girl, crying in the dark, with no food and no way out. That night, it got worse. And if you think locking me in was the peak, it wasn't. Because I heard footsteps coming back. Then the sound of the bolt unlocking. I ran to the corner, barefoot, terrified. George came in, smiling. But what he was holding, that's what truly broke me. George stood in the doorway of the laundry room with a shadow across his face. I had never seen him like that before. He was holding something. At first, I thought it was a belt. But as he stepped into the light, I saw it was Dad's wooden cane, the one he used when his knee acted up. George never touched Dad's things. None of them did. But now, he held it like a weapon. He closed the door slowly. And it clicked behind him. Just us. Him and me. In that dark, cold room. And I was still barefoot, still wearing the same dress from the day before. I froze. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. He just smirked. Then he said, "Because nobody's gonna stop us." That's when I realized this wasn't just about locking me up. They were testing how far they could go, what they could get away with, and I was their little experiment. I know what you might be thinking. Where was my mother? She passed away when I was 6. Lung infection. Took her quickly and without mercy. My dad never remarried. He tried his best, God bless him. But working double shifts and raising 4 kids on his own, it broke him in places we didn't see until later. And with Mom gone, there was no softness left in the house. Only discipline. Only rules. Only survival. That summer, I had been so excited to spend time with my brothers, to finally be one of the big kids. But what I didn't know was, I was just a pawn in their rebellion. George didn't hit me. Not then. Not with the cane. But he waved it around like he could. Like the threat of it was enough. He walked around the laundry room, knocking it against the walls, dragging it across the floor. Then he leaned in and whispered something that still makes my spine crawl even at 85 years old. "You're not gonna tell anyone. Because if you do, we'll say you broke the cane." He held it up to my face. A fresh splinter was forming near the handle. "And Daddy will believe us. Because you're the little one. You're always causing trouble." Then he left. Just like that. Locked the door behind him. And for the first time in my young life, I realized truth doesn't always matter in families. Sometimes, it's about who speaks first. Who speaks louder. And I was a whisper in a house of thunder. Later that night, Rick and Tommy slipped notes under the door. Little drawings of monsters. One had big red letters that read, "Snitches get stitches." I didn't even know what it meant at the time, but the tone told me enough. Tommy used to be sweet, but under George's thumb, he turned cold. They all did. The next day, they let me out. Like I was a dog being given yard time. My clothes smelled. My legs hurt. But they acted like nothing had happened. Tommy handed me a cookie. Rick laughed like we were at a picnic. And George, he gave me the cane, placed it in my hands and said, "Here. You can return it to Dad when he gets home." I looked down at the crack in the wood. Just like he wanted. He was setting me up. Testing me. Would I protect myself, or protect the family's lie? That evening, I did something I still wonder about to this day. I walked down to the creek near the edge of our backyard, holding the cane. The sun was setting, and fireflies blinked around my knees. And I threw it in. Dad's cane. The proof. The evidence. Gone. Not because I wanted to protect my brothers, but because I didn't want to get punished for telling the truth. Isn't that something? Even as a child, I knew telling the truth wouldn't save me. It would only cost me more pain. When Dad returned the next day, he asked where the cane was. I said, I lost it. He sighed and muttered something about me being careless. George looked at me with a smirk across the table. And in that moment, I decided I was going to keep track of every little thing they did from now on. Because if no one was going to believe me, then one day, I'd make sure they'd be forced to. I started keeping a notebook, hidden in the vent behind the old dresser, with dates, what they said, what they did, and how it made me feel. I wasn't brave enough to fight back yet, but I was smart enough to gather the truth. And one day, I'd use it. But of course, that truth came at a cost. Because the very next week, Rick went too far. And that's when everything truly shattered. I remember the thud. That heavy echoing sound of the basement door slamming shut behind me. Then came the click. A slow, cold click. Rick's voice was on the other side. Mocking. Laughing. I told you to stop snooping, Dotty. I turned in the dark, heart pounding, the cold cement floor beneath my feet. The air smelled like old dust, wet wood, and rusted pipes. Let me out, I yelled, pounding on the door with both fists. Rick, this isn't funny. But he was already walking away, and I heard the unmistakable sound of keys jangling in his pocket. He took the key. I was 10, alone, in the dark, and my brothers had locked me in the basement like garbage. Why? Because I had made a mistake. That morning, I went into George's room when no one was looking. I wasn't snooping, at least, not in the way they made it seem. I was looking for my missing notebook, the one I had started, my record. The only thing I had to prove what they were doing to me. But it was gone. Instead, I found something else. An envelope. With photos. Photos of Dad's bank statements. Withdrawals. Hundreds of dollars. I didn't understand it at the time, but I knew something was wrong. George was stealing from Dad, and Tommy and Rick were helping him hide it. So when Rick caught me leaving the room, he didn't ask questions. He grabbed my arm, twisted it behind my back, and marched me toward the basement. The house was old, and the basement wasn't finished. Just concrete walls, shelves of paint cans, and old rusty tools. One naked light bulb hung from the ceiling, but the chain was broken. I sat down and wrapped my arms around my knees. My heart thumped so loudly it drowned out the silence. Every creak of the house above me made me flinch, and every second that passed reminded me they were punishing me for knowing the truth. But the real fear came later, when I realized the furnace was still on, and the smell of gas was getting stronger. I crawled toward the back corner, where the small window sat near the ceiling. It was too high for me to reach, too small to squeeze through. I yelled until my voice cracked. I banged on the metal pipes, but no one came. Upstairs, I heard music. The radio. They were ignoring me. I thought of Mom. How she used to braid my hair while singing lullabies. How safe I felt when she held me. And I whispered to the darkness, please, please don't let me die here. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. I don't remember. Time stops making sense when you're scared. Suddenly, the door creaked open. A sliver of light cut through the blackness. Tommy stood there. Not Rick. Not George. But Tommy, the one who used to draw dragons for me. He looked nervous. I'm not supposed to be down here, he whispered. Rick said we should leave you overnight. But I heard you crying. I could barely speak. My throat was dry. He walked down slowly, holding a flashlight. And when he got to me, he knelt and looked me in the eye. "Don't tell George," he said. "Please." He helped me up. I was shaking. My knees were scraped. Tommy led me out. And for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, he still had a heart. But when we got upstairs, I saw George waiting in the hallway. His arms crossed, his eyes cold. And Tommy let go of my hand, backed away, said nothing. George stepped forward. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just whispered, "So you want to be a snitch?" Then he slapped me across the face. It was the first time one of them had actually hit me. And the worst part, I didn't even cry. I was too numb, too tired, too broken. George turned to Tommy. "You let her out?" Tommy shook his head. "No. She got out through the vent." And just like that, they both laughed. Like it was funny. Like my pain didn't matter. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid awake in the hallway, afraid to go into any room, afraid to speak, afraid to breathe too loud. Dad came home the next morning. He didn't notice the bruise. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. George had already told him I fell playing in the attic. And just like always, Dad believed the boys. Because I was just little Dotty. Always clumsy. Always exaggerating. But I kept watching. Keep writing. I borrowed paper from school and tucked it in my shoe. Wrote on the backs of old cereal boxes. I was building my own truth, one page at a time. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. Because just 2 days later, Dad collapsed at the post office. Stroke. He was rushed to the hospital. And with him gone again, George was in charge. Completely. And that's when they stopped hiding their cruelty. No more secrets. No more pretending. They made it clear, I wasn't their sister anymore. I was a prisoner. And what George did next, it would change my life forever. He stood over the fire pit, holding it. My notebook. The one where I had written everything. Dates, names, bruises, threats. My only record of the truth. George looked at me with that cruel half-smile. He didn't say a word. Just dropped it in. I lunged forward. "No. Please, George, please." But Rick grabbed my arm and yanked me back, laughing. The pages caught fire so quickly. All that work, all that pain I put into words, gone in a burst of flame and smoke. And then George said, "You're not the only one who knows how to keep records, Dotty." He held up a Polaroid of me in the hallway, crying, screaming. He'd taken it while I was locked in the basement. "You try to tell Dad what happened," he said, "and I'll show this. I'll tell him you went crazy, that you tried to hurt yourself. And who's he gonna believe?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My voice felt stuck in my chest. I was 10. But in that moment, I felt like I was 100 years old. With Dad in the hospital, George had taken full control of the house. He kept all the keys. He controlled the food, the phone, even the mailbox. No one came to visit us. And no one knew what was happening behind those walls. Tommy, once again, was silent. He barely made eye contact anymore. I think he was scared too. Rick. He'd become George's little echo. Meaner, louder, more dangerous. One afternoon, I tried to run away. I waited until Rick fell asleep on the couch and crept through the laundry room to the back door. But the key was gone. George had taken every exit and made sure only he could unlock them. I was trapped in my own home, held hostage by the people who were supposed to protect me. A few days later, I heard them talking in the kitchen. They were fighting. About money. Rick said, "We shouldn't touch the savings account, George. That's for Dad's surgery." But George snapped, "You think he's gonna make it? He's old, and half his body doesn't work. I'm not waiting around to live off food stamps." Tommy said nothing, just stared at the wall. That night, I wrote again. This time, I hid my new writing inside the lining of my teddy bear. The one Mom gave me before she passed. I cut the seam gently and slipped a folded piece of cardboard inside. Every time I had the chance, I added more. Piece by piece. It was risky, but it was the only way I could keep the truth alive. Then, one afternoon, something strange happened. A letter came in the mail. It had my name on it. George didn't notice. He was busy yelling at Rick about some missing cash. So I snuck outside during trash duty and grabbed it from the box. It was a birthday card. From my aunt, Dad's younger sister. She lived 2 towns over. I'd only met her once when I was 5, but I remembered her warm laugh. Inside the card was a short message. "Happy birthday, Dotty. I hope you're smiling. Call me anytime. I'd love to hear your voice." And there it was. Her number. That night, I waited. Until everyone had gone to sleep. Until the house was silent. I crept downstairs, heart pounding. The phone sat on the wall in the hallway. The long coiled cord dangling like a rope. I dialed slowly. Each number clicked like a gun cocking. It rang once, twice, then, "Hello." My voice cracked. "It's me, Dotty." There was silence. Then she said my name again, slowly. "Dotty, is everything all right?" And I whispered the words I had wanted to scream for weeks. "Please come get me." I told her everything I could in under 2 minutes. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just said, "Pack what you can. I'll be there first thing in the morning." But I never got the chance. Because Rick woke up. And he saw me. He yanked the phone from the wall. Screamed so loud the whole house shook. George came running. Tommy too. George looked at the ripped phone cord. Then at me. And he said something I'll never forget. "Now you're done." That night, they locked me in the attic. No food. No blanket. Just the cold floor and the rats scratching near the beams. And before he shut the door, George hissed, "You think someone's coming for you? Not before we're done with you." Then he slammed the door. And bolted it. I believed it. For a moment, I believed no one would ever find me. That I'd vanish in that attic like a ghost. Forgotten. Alone. But at sunrise, someone knocked on the front door. Hard. Sharp. Official. Then a voice rang out. "This is Child Welfare Services. Open the door now." Bang! The attic door flew open. Light poured in, blinding me. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. That I had finally passed out and angels were carrying me away. But it wasn't an angel. It was a woman in a gray coat, hair pulled into a tight bun, and a badge around her neck. She looked me over and gasped. "My God!" She turned around and yelled down the stairs. "She's up here. Call in the officer." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move. I was just frozen. Then I heard a voice I never thought I'd hear again. "Dotty!" It was Aunt Lily. She pushed past the woman and ran to me, wrapping me in her arms. "I'm here. I've got you now. You're safe." And right then I cried. Not just tears, but everything I had been holding in for weeks. I cried into her coat like it was the only home I had left. That morning turned into a blur. People. Flashlights. Police radios. George tried to lie. He told the officer I had a habit of hiding in places, and they were just trying to keep me safe until Dad got back. Rick backed him up. Even Tommy said nothing, but none of it worked. Not this time. Because the woman in the gray coat, her name was Officer Darla, looked straight at me and said, "Is that true, sweetheart?" And for the first time ever, I didn't stay silent. I said, "No." They locked me in the attic. George burned my notebook. Rick hit me. They said no one would believe me. The room went quiet. Even George looked shocked. And then, Officer Darla turned around and said 3 words that I will never forget. "Put them in cuffs." George's smirk vanished. Rick started shouting. Tommy just stood there, shaking. "I didn't do anything." Rick screamed, "She's making it up." But the officers were already reading him his rights. George tried to resist. He pushed one of the officers and yelled, "This is our house." But Aunt Lily stepped forward and said, "Not anymore. Your father signed over temporary guardianship before the surgery. This house is mine now." While they were led out in handcuffs, George looked at me one last time. And he didn't look angry. He looked scared. Because he knew I had finally won. I stayed with Aunt Lily after that. Her house smelled like fresh cookies and old books. She let me sleep with the light on for as long as I wanted. She enrolled me in school again, took me to therapy, and every night before bed, she hugged me and said, "No one will ever hurt you again. I promise." But the story didn't end there. A week later, we visited Dad in the hospital. He was awake, but weak. Half his face didn't move. I told him everything. About George. About Rick. Even about Tommy. He didn't say much. Just held my hand and wept. "I failed you," he whispered. "I never thought. I didn't know." And I forgave him. Because as much pain as I'd been through, I didn't want to carry hate too. The trial came a few months later. George and Rick were tried as adults. Tommy was sent to a juvenile center for rehabilitation. I sat in that courtroom with Aunt Lily beside me, clutching my teddy bear. And when the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I looked up at the judge and smiled for the first time in months. Justice. Not just for me, but for every kid who was told to stay quiet. For every girl who was locked in a room and told her pain didn't matter. Years passed. I grew up, went to college, became a music teacher, then a wife, then a mother, then a grandma. But I never forgot that attic, or the fire pit, or the phone cord ripped from the wall. And I never forgot that notebook, the one George burned. So when my granddaughter turned 10, I handed her a new notebook, wrapped in blue ribbon. And I said, "Write your truth, even when they tell you not to." Especially then. But just when I thought the past was buried, Tommy showed up at my doorstep. He was in his 60s, gray hair, eyes full of regret. He said, "Dotty, I need to tell you something. What we did, it wasn't the whole story. There's something else you need to know." And what he revealed next turned everything I thought I knew upside down. I stood there in my doorway, 85 years old, gray hair tucked in a loose bun, wrapped in my favorite old cardigan, and stared into the face of the brother I hadn't seen in nearly 4 decades. Tommy. His hands trembled. His eyes were red. He looked like a man dragging around 1,000 ghosts. "I don't want forgiveness," he said. "I just want to tell you the truth before I die." I should have slammed the door. But instead, I opened it. Because deep down, I needed to know. I needed to understand why. Why did the brother who once drew dragons for me become so silent? Why did he let George ruin me? Why did he let me carry all the pain alone? We sat at my kitchen table, just like we used to when we were kids, except now, the air was heavy with memories that hadn't rested in 75 years. He held a mug of tea with both hands. Didn't take a sip. Then he began. I knew what George was doing, he said quietly. Not all of it. Not at first. But enough. He paused, looked down at the table like it held a mirror to his guilt. Rick just followed George because he was scared of him. I was scared too, but not just of George. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean? Tommy swallowed hard. Dotty, it wasn't George's idea to burn your notebook. It wasn't even Rick's idea to lock you in the basement. I leaned back, the hairs on my arms rising. Then whose idea was it? Tommy looked me in the eyes and said the last name I ever expected to hear. Dad's. I dropped my spoon. It clattered to the floor. That's not funny, I said coldly. But he didn't smile. He didn't blink. No. He didn't say it directly. But you remember how he changed after Mom died, right? Distant. Angry. Always tired. I nodded slowly. That was true. He used to talk to George late at night in the shed. I listened once. I shouldn't have. He told George. Tommy's voice cracked. He told George you needed to be disciplined hard because you were going to grow up like your mother. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Tommy kept going, barely above a whisper. Bradshaw said he heard your dad crying, telling George, she's just a child. She's all I have left. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in an old napkin. He placed it gently on the table. I unwrapped it. My hands froze. It was the one page from my original notebook. The one with the date written in big block letters. July 14th, 1950. And beneath it, my own childlike handwriting. George said I was a mistake. But I'm not. I know I'm not. I stared at it like it was a photograph of my own soul. Tommy whispered. I found it before George burned the notebook. I kept it all these years. I was too much of a coward to send it. I'm sorry. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't, because at that moment, all I saw was a broken man, one who had finally told the truth, one who had suffered under the same roof, with the same fear, just on a different side of the door. I walked him to the porch. The fall wind brushed through the trees. The sky was painted orange. I'll never forget what happened, I told him. And I can't promise I'll ever fully forgive it. But I'm glad you told me. He nodded, slowly. As he stepped off the porch, he turned back once and said, You were always the strongest of us. That night, I opened a new notebook. And on the first page, I wrote, My name is Dotty Coleman. My truth was buried once, but not anymore. And if you're reading this, know one thing. You are not what they said you are. You are more. But just as I closed the notebook, my phone rang. I picked it up, expecting a telemarketer. But the voice on the other end said, Mrs. Coleman? This is Officer Darla's daughter. She passed away last month and left something in her files. Something about your case. And it's shocking. You might want to sit down. Mrs. Coleman, what I'm about to tell you might change the way you remember everything. That was the first thing she said, Officer Darla's daughter. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the weight in it. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, wrapped in a shawl, my hands clutching the phone like it might break. Go ahead, I said quietly. I'm listening. She told me her mother had passed away a few weeks prior. In sorting through old police records and personal files, She had found a sealed envelope. On it was a name written in faded pen. Dorothy and Coleman. My name. Inside the envelope was a note from Darla herself. And an audio recording. She recorded something the day she closed your case, her daughter explained. She meant to give it to you, but she said in her note, some truths can only be carried when the heart is ready. My fingers trembled. She emailed me the file that same evening, and for the first time in a long while, I sat in front of a computer. Clicked play. And there it was, Darla's voice, older, slower, but still full of strength. Dotty. I never told you this, but during the investigation, I interviewed someone I never reported. Your neighbor, Mr. Bradshaw. He came to me quietly, said he didn't want to get involved, but that he'd seen and heard things. He told me about the shed, about your father yelling at George. But here's the thing. Your father wasn't giving orders. He was begging George to stop. I stopped the recording. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I stood up and walked slowly to the mantel where an old photo of my father sat. Him in his postal uniform, a slight grin on his face. I had spent decades blaming him, thinking he was part of the silence that ruined me. But maybe, just maybe, he tried. And it wasn't enough. The next morning, I went to the attic. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. I hadn't been up there in years. Dust clung to every beam, but the sun poured through the cracks in the wood like gold. And I sat on the very floor where I'd once been locked, where I thought I'd die. And I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Now, here I am, an old woman, with silver hair, 3 beautiful granddaughters, and a lifetime behind me. I tell them stories, not just the fairy tales, but the real ones. I tell them what to do when someone tells you to stay silent, what it means to write your truth, and how bravery doesn't always come with a sword. Sometimes, it comes with a notebook. This is my story. But maybe it's yours too. Because if you've ever been hurt by the ones who were supposed to love you, if you've ever been trapped and told to stay quiet, then I want you to know, you are not alone. And you are not broken. You're a survivor. Like me. Like Dotty.